Hey there, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That helps YouTube know you love creepy stories, and it'll keep sending more your way. Story 1. The House That Remembered. Sarah thought she'd hit the jackpot when her college friend Jake invited her to what he called the party of the century at an old mansion just outside town. The Victorian house stood 3 stories tall, its weathered brick facade and ornate windows giving it an almost regal appearance. Despite years of neglect, the party was already in full swing when Sarah arrived around 10 p.m. Students packed every room, music thumped through the floors, and red Solo cups littered every available surface. Jake greeted her with a beer and shouted over the noise that he'd found the place through some sketchy rental app. The owner was apparently desperate for cash and didn't ask too many questions about what kind of gathering they were planning. Everything seemed normal for the first few hours. Sarah danced, laughed with friends, and enjoyed the novelty of partying in such an unusual venue. The mansion had character, creaky floors, dim hallways lined with faded portraits, and rooms filled with antique furniture covered in white sheets. But as midnight approached, things began to feel off. It started with the temperature. Despite the crowd and the late October heat, the house grew noticeably colder. Sarah watched her breath form small clouds as she spoke, and several people began pulling on jackets. Someone joked about the old heating system, but the thermostat read 75 degrees. Then came the sounds. Beneath the pounding bass of the music, Sarah began hearing other noises, footsteps in empty rooms above, doors creaking open and shut, and what sounded like whispered conversations in the walls themselves. When she mentioned it to Jake, he laughed it off. "Old houses make weird noises," he said, but she noticed he kept glancing nervously at the ceiling. Around 1 a.m., people started disappearing, not leaving the party, disappearing. Sarah watched her friend Emma head upstairs to use the bathroom and simply never come back down. When Sarah went looking for her, she found the upstairs bathroom empty, windows still latched from the inside. Emma's purse sat on the sink counter, her phone still buzzing with missed calls. The search for Emma revealed something even more disturbing. In what appeared to be the master bedroom, someone had pulled the sheets off the furniture, revealing pieces that looked suspiciously like they were from the 1940s. But more unsettling were the photographs scattered across the dresser, dozens of pictures showing parties just like theirs. Same house, same rooms, but the clothing and hairstyles spanned decades. In one sepia-toned photo from what looked like the 1950s, Sarah could swear she saw Emma's face in the crowd. By 2 a.m., panic had set in. 5 people had vanished without a trace, including Jake. The remaining partygoers huddled together in the main living room, too terrified to split up or venture into other parts of the house. Someone tried calling 911, but their phones showed no signal, despite having full bars just hours earlier. That's when they found the guest book. Hidden beneath a stack of newspapers on the front hall table was an old leather-bound book, filled with signatures and dates stretching back to 1923. Every entry followed the same pattern: groups of young people signing in for parties that had taken place exactly 25 years apart. The most recent entries were from 1998, the handwriting still fresh, the ink barely dry. As Sarah flipped through the pages, her blood turned to ice. Near the back of the book, in what appeared to be Emma's distinctive handwriting, was a signature dated that very night, but the entry was old and faded, as if it had been written decades ago. The remaining partygoers made a desperate decision to leave immediately. But as they reached the front door, they discovered it wouldn't open. The handle turned freely, but the door remained sealed shut, as if welded in place. The windows were the same. They could see out clearly, but the glass wouldn't break, no matter how hard they hit it. As 3 a.m. approached, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach drop. The photographs on the walls, the ones showing parties from different eras, were changing. In real time, she watched as new figures appeared in the frames. There was Jake frozen mid-laugh in a photo dated 1973. There was Emma dancing in a picture labeled 1951. The house had been collecting partygoers for a century, trapping them in its walls, preserving them in photographs like insects in amber. Every 25 years, it opened its doors to a new group, adding them to its collection. Sarah was found 3 days later by police responding to a missing persons report. She was alone in the house, sitting on the front porch in a catatonic state, clutching the guest book. When she finally spoke weeks later, all she could remember was signing her name in the book. As the clock struck 3 a.m., her friends were never found. The truly terrifying part, when investigators searched the property, they discovered Sarah had signed the guest book in 1998. According to the records, she had been missing for 25 years, though she had only aged 3 days. The house burned down mysteriously the following month, but locals say that every October, you can still hear the sound of parties echoing from the empty lot where it once stood. Story 2. The influencer's last stream. Madison Chen had built her entire identity around being the perfect party girl influencer. With 200k followers on Instagram and a lucrative sponsorship deal with a major alcohol brand, she documented every aspect of her nightlife adventures. So when her friend Taylor invited her to an exclusive underground party in an abandoned subway station, Madison saw it as content gold. "This is going to be absolutely insane," she told her phone camera as she applied her makeup. "We're talking about the most exclusive party of the year. I can't even tell you where it is, but just know your girl is about to serve looks in the most incredible location." The party was everything Madison had hoped for. The abandoned platform had been transformed into a neon wonderland, complete with professional DJ equipment, full bar setups, and atmospheric lighting that made everything look like a music video. Madison spent the first hour taking hundreds of photos and going live on Instagram, her followers eating up every second of the exclusive content. But as the night progressed, Madison began noticing things her camera couldn't capture, or rather, things that only appeared through her phone screen. When she looked directly at other party goers, they seemed normal enough. Young, attractive people dancing and drinking, having the time of their lives. But when she viewed them through her phone camera, their faces looked wrong, distorted, features stretched too wide, smiles too big, eyes completely black. At first, Madison convinced herself it was just the lighting or a glitch with her phone. She was making too much money from this content to let paranoia ruin her night. Her followers were going crazy for the mysterious underground location, and she was gaining new subscribers by the minute. Around midnight, Madison decided to explore deeper into the tunnel system for more dramatic footage. With her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness, she ventured away from the main party area into the older parts of the abandoned station. The tunnels stretched endlessly in both directions, occasionally lit by flickering emergency lights that cast eerie shadows on the tiled walls. That's when she started finding the phones. Scattered throughout the tunnels were dozens of smartphones, all in various states of decay. Some looked like they'd been there for years, their screens cracked and cases covered in rust. Others appeared newer, their batteries still showing trace amounts of power. Madison picked up one of the phones and managed to get it working. The last video on it was dated 3 months earlier and showed another party in the exact same location. The video was horrifying. What started as typical party footage quickly devolved into chaos. The person filming was clearly running through the tunnels, their panicked breathing audible over the sound of footsteps echoing behind them. Other party-goers appeared in frame occasionally, but their faces were the distorted nightmare versions Madison had been seeing through her camera. The video ended abruptly with a scream. Madison checked phone after phone, finding similar videos dating back years. Every few months, there was evidence of another party in the tunnels, and every video ended the same way, with someone running in terror before the footage cut out. The phones belonged to influencers, party photographers, social media addicts, people just like her who had come to document the exclusive event. Panicking, Madison tried to leave the tunnel system, but quickly realized she was lost. The passages all looked identical in the dark, and her phone's GPS showed no signal. Worse, when she tried to call for help, she discovered her phone wasn't connecting to any cellular networks, despite showing full bars. The party sounds that had been echoing through the tunnels earlier had gone completely silent. That's when she heard the whispers. Voices seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, speaking in languages she couldn't understand. But gradually, Madison realized the voices were speaking English. They were just layered on top of each other, dozens of conversations happening simultaneously, creating an incomprehensible wall of sound. As she listened more closely, she could make out individual phrases, so exclusive. No one knows about this place. The content is amazing. My followers are going to love this. They were the voices of every influencer who had come before her, still trying to create content even after disappearing into the tunnels. Madison began running, using her phone's flashlight to navigate the maze-like passages. But every tunnel seemed to lead deeper underground, and the whispers grew louder with each step. Her phone battery was draining impossibly fast, and she realized with growing horror that even if she found a way out, she had no proof of where she'd been. Her Instagram stories from earlier had vanished, her photos were corrupted, and her follower count was dropping by the thousands. The truth hit her like a physical blow. She was being erased from the internet in real time. Her entire digital identity was being systematically deleted as if she had never existed. Every post, every photo, every video she had ever made was disappearing from her profiles. As her phone battery hit 1%, Madison made one final desperate video. She explained what was happening, warned others to stay away from underground parties, and begged her followers to remember her. But as she hit record, she watched her reflection in the phone screen transform into one of the distorted nightmare faces she had been seeing all night. The video uploaded automatically to her Instagram story just as her phone died, plunging her into complete darkness. Madison's screams echoed through the tunnels for hours, eventually joining the chorus of whispers in the walls. Madison's phone was found by urban explorers 6 months later, adding to the collection scattered throughout the tunnels. Her Instagram account shows she was last active that night, but all her previous content is gone. Her follower count shows 0, as if her entire online presence had been systematically erased. The only trace of her final hours is a single corrupted video file that occasionally appears on random social media accounts, a grainy clip of someone screaming in an underground tunnel, their face too distorted to identify. The video is always automatically deleted within minutes, but not before a few viewers catch it and wonder who the person was and what happened to them. The abandoned subway entrance was sealed by the city shortly after Madison disappeared, but local urban explorers report that cell phones still occasionally pick up Wi-Fi signals from deep underground networks with names like Madison Chen _iPhone and help _remember. Story 3. The birthday surprise. Kevin Martinez was dreading his 25th birthday. He had been going through a rough patch, recently laid off from his job, struggling with depression, and feeling increasingly isolated from his friend group. So when his best friend Alex suggested throwing him a surprise party at their old college hangout spot, Kevin reluctantly agreed, hoping it might lift his spirits. The location was perfect for a surprise, an old hunting cabin Alex's family owned deep in the woods about an hour outside of town. Kevin had spent countless weekends there during college, and the place held a lot of good memories. Alex assured him it would just be their close friend group, maybe 10 people at most, and they'd keep it low-key. Kevin arrived at the cabin around 8 p.m., expecting to find his friends waiting inside. Instead, the place was dark and appeared empty. He checked his phone for messages from Alex, but had no signal in the remote location. Assuming he was early, Kevin let himself in with the spare key he knew Alex kept under the fake rock by the front door. The cabin felt different than he remembered. The familiar furniture was arranged strangely, pushed against the walls, as if to create more space in the center of the main room. Old birthday decorations hung from the ceiling, not new ones, but faded streamers and deflated balloons that looked like they'd been there for years. A large birthday cake sat on the kitchen counter, but the frosting had hardened and cracked, and the candles appeared to have been lit and blown out multiple times. Kevin called out for his friends, but his voice seemed to be absorbed by the walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of old wood settling. He tried the light switches, but nothing happened. The electricity was apparently out, though he couldn't remember Alex mentioning any issues with the power. As Kevin explored the cabin looking for clues about where everyone might be, he discovered something that made his skin crawl. In the back bedroom, spread across the bed, were dozens of photographs. They showed birthday parties at the cabin spanning what appeared to be several decades. The pictures were organized chronologically, starting with sepia-toned photos from the 1940s and progressing through the years to more recent color photos. What made the photos disturbing wasn't just their age, it was their similarity. Every party showed the same setup, the same decorations, the same cake in the same spot on the counter. The people changed from decade to decade, but their expressions were oddly uniform. Everyone in every photo had the same forced smile, the same vacant look in their eyes, as if they were performing happiness rather than feeling it. In the most recent photos, Kevin recognized some faces, people from town he hadn't seen in years, old classmates who had supposedly moved away after graduation. But in these pictures they all looked wrong somehow. Their smiles were too wide, their eyes too bright, and their skin had a waxy, artificial quality. Kevin was studying one particular photo when he heard voices outside. Relief flooded through him as he recognized Alex's laugh, followed by the sound of car doors slamming and multiple people talking at once. His friends had finally arrived, and he could stop letting his imagination run wild. But when Kevin looked out the window, what he saw made his blood freeze. The people walking toward the cabin weren't quite right. They moved in perfect synchronization, their steps matching exactly, their heads all turned at precisely the same angle. Their voices rose and fell in unnatural harmony, as if they were reading from a script they had all memorized. As they got closer, Kevin could see their faces more clearly in the moonlight. They looked like his friends, but distorted, like wax figures that had started to melt and been hastily reformed. Alex's features were recognizable but slightly off, his smile too wide, his eyes set just a bit too far apart, his movements too fluid and precise. Kevin backed away from the window and looked desperately for another exit. The back door was locked from the inside, but when he tried to unlock it, the mechanism wouldn't budge. The windows were painted shut and wouldn't open despite his increasingly frantic efforts to force them. Surprised, the voices outside shouted in perfect unison. Though Kevin hadn't heard anyone enter the cabin, he spun around to find his friends standing in the main room, all wearing identical expressions of artificial joy. They began singing Happy Birthday in harmony that was too perfect, too coordinated to be natural. As they sang, Kevin noticed details that made him want to scream. Their mouths didn't quite match the words they were singing, as if they were lip-syncing to a recording. Their eyes never blinked, and they all breathed at exactly the same time. When the song ended, they all tilted their heads to the left at precisely the same angle, and held perfectly still, waiting. "Make a wish, Kevin," Alex said, though his voice sounded like it was coming from far away, even though he was standing just a few feet away. The others nodded in agreement, their heads moving with mechanical precision. Kevin approached the cake cautiously, his hands shaking as he leaned toward the candles. The frosting, which had looked old and cracked from a distance, now appeared fresh and perfect up close. The candles burned with flames that didn't flicker,
as if they were fake LED lights rather than real fire. As Kevin leaned closer to blow out the candles, he caught his reflection in the cake's shiny surface, but the face looking back at him wasn't his own. It was the same waxy, artificial expression he'd seen on his friends. His mouth was stretched into an impossibly wide smile, his eyes were too bright and vacant, and his features had the same slightly melted quality he'd noticed in the photographs. He jerked back from the cake, but when he looked up, his friends were all staring at him with expectant expressions. "Did you make your wish?" they asked in unison, their voices creating an eerie echo in the small space. Kevin ran for the front door, but it wouldn't open. He threw his full weight against it, but it held firm as if it had been welded shut. His friends watched his panic with mild interest, their heads tilting in unison as they observed his desperate attempts to escape. "Every year someone new joins the party," Alex said, though Kevin could see that Alex's mouth wasn't moving. "It's tradition. We've been waiting so long for you to be ready." As the clock on the mantel struck midnight, Kevin felt a strange numbness spreading through his body. His movements became slower, more deliberate. When he looked at his hands, his skin had taken on the same waxy quality he'd noticed in his reflection. His panic began to fade, replaced by an artificial calm that felt like cotton filling his brain. The last thing Kevin remembered clearly was feeling his mouth stretch into that impossibly wide smile. Then everything became fuzzy and distant, like watching his life through thick glass. He found himself standing with his friends, all of them facing toward the door, with identical expectant expressions, waiting for next year's birthday surprise. Kevin's family reported him missing the next day when he failed to return home. The search focused on the woods around the cabin, but investigators found no trace of him. The cabin appeared to have been empty for years, with no signs of recent use. The birthday decorations and cake Kevin had seen were nowhere to be found, but locals in the area report that every year on Kevin's birthday, lights can be seen in the windows of the supposedly abandoned cabin, and the sound of people singing happy birthday echoes through the woods. Those brave enough to investigate have found fresh tire tracks in the driveway and footprints leading to the front door. The photographs Kevin discovered have never been found, but every few years, someone in town goes missing around their birthday, and the abandoned cabin lights up for one night. The next morning, it's always dark and empty again, as if nothing had happened.
Story 4. The New Year's Eve countdown. Rachel Thompson was supposed to be celebrating the new year at Times Square with her girlfriend, but a last-minute flight cancellation left them stranded in the small town of Cedar Falls, with no hotel rooms available and no way to get home until morning. They were resigned to spending midnight in the airport when a friendly local named Mrs. Henderson overheard their predicament. "Oh honey, you can't spend New Year's Eve in an airport," Mrs. Henderson said with genuine concern. "There's a lovely gathering at my house tonight. Just some neighbors and friends welcoming in the new year. You're more than welcome to join us." Rachel was hesitant to accept charity from a stranger, but her girlfriend Jess was enthusiastic about the unexpected adventure. Mrs. Henderson seemed harmless enough, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a warm smile. She insisted it would be no trouble at all, and that they'd love to have some young people add energy to their quiet celebration. The house was a beautiful Victorian mansion in the town's historic district, lit up with warm yellow lights and decorated with tasteful New Year's garland. Through the windows they could see people mingling inside, and the whole scene looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. Henderson introduced them to the other guests, all locals who had known each other for years. Everyone was incredibly welcoming, insisting Rachel and Jess try the homemade cookies, the mulled cider, and the various casseroles that covered the dining room table. The gathering had the comfortable feeling of a family reunion, with stories being shared and gentle laughter filling the rooms. But as the evening progressed, Rachel began to notice odd details.
The conversations seemed to cycle through the same topics repeatedly. The weather, the decorations, how wonderful it was to have everyone together. When she tried to steer discussions toward current events or ask about people's jobs, the responses were vague, and the conversations quickly shifted back to the same comfortable, neutral subjects. More unsettling was the way people moved through the house. Everyone seemed to follow invisible patterns, walking the same roads, at the same times, gathering in the same groups, in the same locations. At 9:30, everyone migrated to the living room. At 10:15, they all moved to the kitchen. At 11 o'clock, they returned to the living room and arranged themselves in a perfect circle around the coffee table. Rachel whispered her concerns to Jess, but her girlfriend was having too much fun to pay attention. Jess had always been more social than Rachel, and she was clearly enjoying being the center of attention as the guests asked endless questions about their travels and their life in the city. As midnight approached, Mrs. Henderson announced it was time for the countdown tradition. She led everyone to the basement, explaining that her late husband had built a beautiful recreation room down there specifically for New Year's celebrations. The basement was indeed impressive. Wood-paneled walls, a full bar, and comfortable seating arranged around a large television. But what caught Rachel's attention was the collection of photographs covering one entire wall. They showed New Year's Eve parties in the same basement, stretching back decades. In the earliest photos, the guests were young, but as the pictures progressed through the years, the faces remained exactly the same, while only the clothing and hairstyles changed to match the passing decades. Mrs. Henderson noticed Rachel studying the photos. "We've been celebrating together for a very long time," she said with that same warm smile. "It's wonderful when you find a group of people who really understand each other." As the television countdown began, Rachel realized with growing horror that the people in the photos weren't just similar to the current party guests. They were exactly the same people. Mrs. Henderson looked identical in every picture, from the earliest black and white photo to the most recent color image. None of the guests had aged a single day in over 50 years. 10, 9, 8. The countdown echoed from the television, but the guests weren't looking at the screen. They were all staring directly at Rachel and Jess with expressions that had lost their earlier warmth. 7, 6, 5. Rachel grabbed Jess's hand and tried to pull her toward the stairs, but her girlfriend wouldn't move. When Rachel looked at Jess's face, her blood turned to ice. Jess was staring ahead with the same vacant expression as the other guests, her mouth moving silently along with the countdown. 4, 3, 2. Rachel ran for the stairs alone, but the basement door at the top had somehow locked itself. She pounded on it frantically while behind her, the voices continued the countdown in perfect unison. 1. Happy New Year. The cheering that followed was unlike anything Rachel had ever heard. Too loud, too coordinated, lasting far longer than any normal celebration. When she turned back toward the basement, she saw that all the guests were now facing her direction, their faces wearing identical expressions of hungry anticipation. "Welcome to the family, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, though her voice seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, rather than just from her mouth. "We have so many New Year's Eves to share together." Rachel felt a strange drowsiness washing over her, as if someone had drugged her drink. Her legs became heavy, and the overwhelming urge to sleep made it difficult to keep her eyes open. The last thing she remembered was seeing Jess walking toward her with that same empty smile, reaching out to take her hand. Rachel woke up on January 2nd in a hotel room with no memory of how she got there. Jess was beside her, equally confused about the missing time. When they asked the hotel staff about their reservation, they were told that Mrs. Henderson had called to arrange and pay for their room, explaining that they had been her guests for New Year's Eve, but had had too much to drink to drive safely. They tried to find Mrs. Henderson's house to thank her properly, but none of the locals they asked had ever heard of her. The address they remembered led to an empty lot that had been vacant for years. The Victorian mansion they clearly remembered celebrating in simply didn't exist. The truly disturbing discovery came weeks later when Rachel was researching the history of Cedar Falls for an article she was writing. In the town's archived newspaper collection, she found a story from 1952 about a tragic New Year's Eve fire that had killed 12 people at a party in the historic district. The list of victims included Mrs. Henderson and 11 others who matched the descriptions of the party guests perfectly. But what made Rachel's hand shake as she read was the final paragraph of the article, which mentioned that 2 out-of-town visitors had also been present at the party, but had somehow escaped the fire. Their names were listed as Rachel Thompson and Jessica Chen, exactly matching Rachel and Jess's names, despite the fact that they hadn't been born until decades later. Rachel tried to convince herself it was just a coincidence, but every New Year's Eve since, she receives a card in the mail with no return address. The cards are always the same, a vintage-style New Year's greeting with a handwritten message, "Looking forward to celebrating with you again soon. Love, Mrs. Henderson." And every year the postmark shows they were mailed from Cedar Falls on December 31st, even though the town's post office has been closed since 1987.
Story 5. The housewarming from hell. Marcus and Diana Reed thought they'd found their dream home, a spacious colonial in an upscale neighborhood that had been sitting on the market for months due to a motivated seller who needed to relocate quickly for work. The price was almost too good to be true, but their real estate agent assured them there were no major issues with the property, just some outdated decor that needed refreshing. To celebrate their new home and show it off to friends and family, they decided to throw a housewarming party on their first Saturday night in the house. Diana spent weeks planning the perfect evening, catered appetizers, a signature cocktail, and a playlist designed to show off the house's excellent acoustics and open floor plan. The party was everything Diana had hoped for. 30 of their closest friends and family members filled the house with laughter and conversation, everyone admiring the high ceilings, original hardwood floors, and stunning kitchen renovation the previous owners had completed. Marcus felt genuinely happy for the first time in months, watching his wife glow with pride as she gave tours of their beautiful new home. Around 10 p.m., as the party was reaching its peak energy, something strange happened. The music cut out abruptly, but instead of silence, everyone could hear different music playing, something classical and much older, as if it were coming from an antique radio in another room. The sound seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, and despite checking all the obvious sources, no one could figure out where it was originating. Maybe the previous owners left some kind of sound system running, Marcus suggested, though privately he was puzzled. They had done a thorough walkthrough of the house and hadn't seen any audio equipment they hadn't installed themselves. Then Diana's sister Jenny pointed to the living room windows and asked, "Who are those people in your backyard?" Everyone crowded around the windows to look, and sure enough, there were figures moving around in the darkness of the backyard. They appeared to be dressed formally, the women in long gowns, and the men in suits that looked like they were from several decades earlier. They were dancing in pairs on the patio, though there was no visible light source, and no apparent music audible outside. Marcus grabbed a flashlight and headed for the back door to investigate, but when he opened it, the backyard was completely empty. The patio showed no signs of recent use, and the motion sensor lights that should have activated when people were dancing remained dark. "That's really weird," said their neighbor Tom, who had joined them at the window. "I could have sworn I saw at least 8 people out there dancing." The party guests were unsettled, but tried to laugh off the strange occurrence. Someone suggested it might have been a trick of light from passing cars, though the backyard wasn't visible from the street. Others theorized it could have been teenagers playing a prank,
though the figures they'd seen had moved with the formal elegance of ballroom dancers, not the casual energy of kids fooling around. As the evening continued, more disturbing things began happening. Guests reported feeling inexplicably cold in certain rooms, despite the house being consistently heated. The bathroom door on the second floor kept locking itself from the inside, requiring Marcus to remove the pins from the hinges twice during the party to let trapped guests out. And several people mentioned hearing conversations in rooms that were supposed to be empty. Diana tried to maintain her hostess' composure, but she was becoming increasingly rattled. During one of her tours of the house, she had opened the master bedroom door to show off their new furniture, only to find the room filled with people in vintage clothing sitting quietly on their bed and chairs. When she blinked and looked again, the room was empty, showing only her own furniture arranged exactly as they had left it. The breaking point came around midnight, when Diana's mother screamed from the kitchen. Everyone rushed to see what was wrong, and found her pointing at the windows above the sink. Pressed against the glass from the outside were dozens of handprints, as if a crowd of people were trying to get in. But when Marcus ran outside to investigate, there was no one there, and the windows were clean. "We need to leave," Diana whispered to Marcus, her face pale with terror. "Something is very wrong with this house." But as they began encouraging their guests to call it a night, they discovered that several people were missing. Diana's college roommate Sarah had apparently vanished sometime during the evening, along with Marcus's brother Paul and two other couples. The remaining guests searched the house thoroughly, calling out names and checking every room, but found no trace of the missing people. The truly terrifying discovery came when they checked the garage. Paul's car was still there, along with Sarah's SUV and the other missing guests' vehicles. Their purses and wallets were still in the house where they had left them, but the people themselves had simply vanished. As the remaining party guests debated whether to call the police, Diana noticed something that made her stomach drop. The family photos the previous owners had left behind, pictures she had planned to replace but hadn't gotten around to yet, were changing. She watched in horror as new faces appeared in the formal family portraits. There was Sarah, standing stiffly beside a man in a 1950s era suit. There was Paul, seated at what appeared to be a dinner party from decades past. When she pointed this out to Marcus, he saw it too. Their missing friends were being absorbed into the house's history, becoming part of photograph collections from eras long before they were born. The house collects people, Diana realized with growing terror. That's why it was so cheap. That's why it's been through so many owners. The remaining guests made a desperate dash for the exits, but found that the front door wouldn't open from the inside. The deadbolt turned freely, but the door remained sealed shut, as if welded in place. The windows that had opened easily earlier in the evening were now immovable. As they searched frantically for another way out, they began hearing the voices of their missing friends calling from somewhere within the walls. Sarah's voice echoed from the living room, though she was nowhere to be seen. Paul's laughter came from the kitchen, but when they ran to find him, the room was empty. One by one, the remaining guests began disappearing as well. Diana watched her mother fade away mid-sentence, becoming translucent before vanishing entirely. Marcus's co-workers simply walked into rooms and never walked back out, though the rooms appeared empty when others looked for them. Diana and Marcus were the last ones left, clinging to each other in the foyer, as the sounds of a massive party echoed through the house around them. They could hear dozens of voices, multiple decades of music playing simultaneously, and the sounds of celebrations from throughout the house's long history. "I think we're already gone," Marcus whispered, and Diana realized he was right. When she looked down at her hands, she could see through them to the hardwood floor below. Diana and Marcus Reed were reported missing by Diana's sister when they failed to show up for Sunday brunch the next day. Police found their house empty, but showed signs of a recent party. The catering was still laid out, Drinks were half finished, and personal belongings were scattered throughout the rooms, as if guests had simply evaporated mid-conversation. The truly puzzling evidence was found in the house's collection of vintage photographs. Several of the pictures now showed people in modern clothing mixed with figures from earlier decades, as if different time periods had been layered together in the same image. Diana and Marcus could be clearly identified in multiple photos, but they appeared to be attending parties from the 1940s, 1960s, and 1980s. The house went back on the market within weeks, once again priced well below comparable properties in the neighborhood. The listing mentioned that the previous owners had relocated suddenly for work and were motivated to sell quickly. It sold within a month to a young couple excited to find such a beautiful home at such an incredible price. They're planning a housewarming party for next weekend.
Story 6. The Graduation Celebration. The night before graduating from Westfield University, Emma Santos and her 5 best friends decided to break into their old dorm building for one final party. Hartwell Hall had been condemned the previous semester due to structural issues and was scheduled for demolition over the summer, but it held too many memories for the friends to let it go without a proper goodbye. Getting into the building was easier than expected. The security was minimal, and they knew about a basement window that had never locked properly. By 11 p.m., they had set up their makeshift party in what used to be the 4th floor common room, complete with battery-powered speakers, wine smuggled out of their final formal dinner, and enough snacks to last the night. Hartwell Hall had been their home for 3 years, and being back in the empty building felt both nostalgic and surreal. Without furniture or other students, their voices echoed strangely through the hallways, and their footsteps sounded unnaturally loud on the worn carpeting. But the friends were determined to make their final night memorable, sharing stories about their favorite dorm memories and taking selfies to commemorate the moment. Around midnight, they decided to visit their old room, 427, where Emma and her roommate Zoe had lived during their sophomore year. The room should have been completely empty, like all the others, but when Emma pushed open the door, she gasped. The room was exactly as they had left it 2 years earlier. Zoe's colorful tapestries still covered the walls, their textbooks were stacked on the desks, and even their coffee-stained rug was spread across the floor between the twin beds. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, as if it had been preserved but untouched for years. "This is impossible," whispered Jake, Emma's boyfriend, who had spent countless hours in that room during their sophomore year. "The university cleaned out all the rooms when they condemned the building. I saw them loading trucks with furniture for weeks, but there it was, their room, perfectly preserved like a museum exhibit." Emma walked slowly toward her old desk, her fingers trailing through the dust on textbooks she remembered studying from. On her nightstand was a photo of all 6 friends from their sophomore year formal, the glass still intact, despite everything else being abandoned. "Look at this," called Sarah from the closet. Inside, hanging exactly where they had left them, were clothes Emma had completely forgotten about. Outfits she had worn to parties, formal dresses from campus events, even her old Halloween costume from that year's dorm party. But when she reached out to touch one of the dresses, her hand passed right through it, as if it were made of mist. That's when they heard the music coming from down the hall, not their battery-powered speakers, which they had left in the common room, but different music entirely. It sounded like a party in full swing, with laughter, conversation, and the kind of loud music that would have gotten them noise complaints from the RA back in the day. The friends followed the sound to room 445, where the door stood slightly ajar, and warm light spilled into the hallway. Through the crack, they could see people inside, college students who looked like they belonged at Westfield, wearing the kind of clothes that had been popular a few years earlier. The room was fully furnished and decorated, looking exactly like a typical dorm room party. "Should we go in?" asked Maria, though her voice betrayed her nervousness. "Maybe there are other people who had the same idea we did." Emma pushed the door open wider,
and the friends stepped inside to find themselves in the middle of a crowded party. The room was packed with students they didn't recognize, all laughing and talking animatedly. But something felt wrong. The conversations were too loud, the laughter too forced, and everyone's movements seemed slightly out of sync with reality. When Emma tried to introduce herself to a girl standing near the window, the girl turned around with a smile that was too wide, and eyes that seemed to look right through her. "Oh, you must be the new ones," she said in a voice that sounded like it was coming from very far away. "We've been waiting for you to join us." That's when Emma noticed the details that made her blood run cold. Despite the party being in full swing, no one was actually drinking from their cups. People held conversations, but their mouths didn't quite match the words that were coming out. And strangest of all, everyone at the party cast no reflection in the mirror that hung on the back of the door. "We need to leave," Emma whispered to her friends, but when she looked around she realized they had spread out through the room and were now talking with other party guests. Jake was laughing with a group of guys near the window, but his laugh sounded hollow and mechanical. Sarah was dancing with a boy whose face kept shifting between different features, as if he couldn't decide what he was supposed to look like. Emma tried to get her friends' attention, but they seemed to be under some kind of spell. Their eyes had the same vacant quality she had noticed in the other party guests, and when she called their names, they responded with the same two wide smiles and distant voices. Panicking, Emma ran back toward their old room, hoping to find some explanation for what was happening. But when she reached room 427, she discovered something that made her scream. The room was no longer empty. It was occupied by two girls who looked exactly like Emma and Zoe from 2 years earlier. The Emma from the past was sitting at her desk, studying from one of the textbooks that had been covered in dust just minutes earlier. The Zoe from the past was getting ready for a party, applying makeup while music played from their old speakers. They moved through their routine with perfect familiarity, as if they were stuck in an endless loop of their sophomore year. When past Emma looked up from her textbook, she stared directly at present Emma with recognition but no surprise. "You're late," she said matter-of-factly. "We've been waiting for you to come back and finish the year." Emma realized with growing horror that the building wasn't just condemned, it was trapped in time, preserving the memories and experiences of everyone who had ever lived there. Every party, every late-night study session, every moment of college life was still happening simultaneously, layered on top of each other in an endless cycle. She ran back toward the stairwell, desperate to find her friends and get them out of the building. But the hallways had changed. Instead of the empty, dusty corridors they had walked through earlier, every room was now occupied and lit up with the warm glow of dorm life. Through open doors she could see students from different eras, some wearing clothes from the 1980s, others from the 1990s, and some from more recent years. All of them were living their college experiences over and over again, trapped in the building's memory like insects in amber. Emma finally found her friends back in the 4th floor common room, where they had started their party, but they were no longer alone. The room was filled with students from throughout Hartwell Hall's history, all celebrating together in a massive party that seemed to include every celebration that had ever taken place in the building. Her friends were in the center of it all, laughing and dancing with people who had graduated years or even decades before. But when Emma looked closely, she could see that her friends' faces had the same waxy, artificial quality as everyone else. They were becoming part of the building's preserved memories, losing their real selves in the process. Emma called Zoe, though the real Zoe was supposed to be at home packing for her move to graduate school. This Zoe looked exactly as she had during their sophomore year, frozen at age 19 forever. "Come dance with us. The party never has to end." Emma backed toward the stairwell, but found that the exit was blocked by more party guests who were encouraging her to stay and join the celebration. Every face was familiar, students she had known throughout her 4 years at Westfield, all frozen at the ages they had been when they lived in Hartwell Hall. "You can't leave," explained a boy Emma recognized from her freshman orientation group. "Once you come back to visit, You become part of the building's story. We're all part of the same experience now. As Emma was surrounded by the celebrating students, she felt the same drowsiness that had affected her friends. Her memories of the outside world began to fade, replaced by an overwhelming desire to stay and party forever. The last coherent thought she had was the realization that she was becoming part of Hartwell Hall's preserved history, just another memory trapped in the building's walls. Emma Santos and her 5 friends were reported missing when they failed to appear at graduation the next morning. Despite extensive searches of the campus and surrounding area, no trace of them was ever found. The university moved up the demolition schedule for Hartwell Hall, citing safety concerns after the disappearances. But on the night before the building was scheduled to be torn down, campus security reported seeing lights in the windows and hearing sounds of a party coming from inside. When they investigated, they found the building empty but warm, as if it had been recently occupied. In the 4th floor common room, they discovered fresh wine stains on the carpet and the faint smell of the perfume Emma had been wearing the night she disappeared. The building was demolished as planned, but construction workers reported strange occurrences during the process. They claimed to hear music and laughter coming from sections of the building that had already been torn down, and several workers reported seeing students in dorm room windows that no longer existed. The lot where Hartwell Hall once stood remains empty, though the university has received multiple offers from developers interested in the prime campus location. Every potential buyer has eventually withdrawn their offer after visiting the site, claiming they heard the sounds of parties coming from underground and felt like they were being watched by invisible observers. Current students walking past the empty lot at night report seeing lights in the windows of a building that's no longer there, and hearing the faint sound of celebration drifting from the vacant space. The university has installed additional lighting and security cameras around the perimeter, but the equipment frequently malfunctions, showing footage of parties happening in empty air.
Story 7. The rooftop rave. Tyler Chen thought he was the luckiest college student alive when he received an exclusive invitation to what was being called the most epic rooftop party of the year. The invitation had appeared in his mailbox with no return address, printed on expensive cardstock that felt more like a wedding invitation than a party flyer. All it contained was an address, a time 11 p.m., and the words, "Bring this invitation for entry. Tell no one." The address led to a sleek downtown high-rise that Tyler had never noticed before, despite driving past the area countless times. The building was all black glass and steel, rising 30 stories into the night sky with no visible signage or business listings. A doorman in an expensive suit waited at the entrance, checking invitations with the efficiency of someone working a VIP event. Tyler joined a line of other young people, all dressed in their party best and clutching identical invitations. Everyone seemed excited, but strangely quiet, as if they were all keeping the same secret. The doorman examined each invitation carefully before allowing guests to enter, and Tyler noticed that after each person was admitted, the doorman made a small mark on a clipboard. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless, with soft music playing and no indication of which floors they were passing. Tyler found himself pressed against the back wall with a dozen other party-goers, all of whom seemed to be around his age. No one spoke during the long ascent, but Tyler attributed this to typical elevator awkwardness. When the doors finally opened on the 30th floor, Tyler stepped into what looked like a party planner's dream. The entire rooftop had been transformed into a luxurious outdoor club, complete with professional DJ equipment, full bar setups, lounge areas with expensive furniture, and a dance floor that seemed to pulse with colored lights in rhythm with the music. The view was breathtaking, the entire city spread out below them, with lights twinkling like stars in every direction. The party was already in full swing, with at least 100 people dancing, drinking, and enjoying what was clearly a very expensive production. Everything looked perfect, from the perfectly groomed bartenders
to the professionally dressed security guards positioned discreetly around the perimeter. Tyler spent the first hour exploring the party and trying to figure out who was hosting such an elaborate event. But every time he asked other guests, he got vague answers or quick topic changes. Some people claimed they had received their invitations through friends. Others said they had found them in various locations around the city, but no one seemed to know who was actually throwing the party. The music was incredible, a perfect mix of current hits and deeper cuts that kept everyone dancing. The drinks were top shelf and apparently unlimited, with bartenders who seemed to anticipate what each guest wanted before they even ordered. Tyler had never been to a party with such attention to detail and unlimited resources, but as the night progressed, Tyler began noticing things that made him uncomfortable. Despite the party being packed with people, he never saw anyone leave. The elevator seemed to only go up, never down, and when he asked a security guard about leaving early, the man gave him a smile that didn't reach his eyes and suggested he enjoy the party while it lasts. More disturbing was the behavior of the other guests. They all seemed to be having an amazing time, dancing and laughing and socializing, but their interactions felt scripted somehow. Conversations followed predictable patterns, laughter came at exactly the right moments, and everyone moved through the party space as if following invisible choreography. Around 2 a.m., Tyler decided he needed some air and walked to the edge of the rooftop to look out over the city. That's when he made a discovery that changed everything. Looking down at the street 30 floors below, he could see the building's reflection in the windows of the office tower across the street. But the reflection showed something impossible. The rooftop appeared empty. No party, no lights, no people, just an empty concrete rooftop with safety barriers around the edges. Tyler blinked hard and looked again, but the reflection remained the same. According to the windows across the street, there was no party happening at all. He was supposedly standing in the middle of a crowded celebration, but the reflection showed only empty space. Panicking, Tyler pulled out his phone to take pictures of what he was seeing, but discovered that his camera wasn't working properly. Every photo came out completely black, as if he were taking pictures in absolute darkness. When he tried to call or text friends, his phone showed no signal despite having shown full bars when he arrived. That's when he noticed something even more terrifying. When he looked closely at the other party guests, he could see that none of them cast shadows, despite the bright party lighting. The bartenders moved with inhuman precision, never spilling a drop or making unnecessary movements, and the DJ hadn't moved from his position behind the equipment for hours, his hands moving over the controls but his body remaining perfectly still. Tyler tried to get the attention of a girl standing near him, but when she turned around, her face was a blank mask with no features, just smooth skin, where her eyes, nose and mouth should have been. When he jerked back in horror, she tilted her head curiously, and her face gradually filled in with normal human features, as if her appearance were being generated in real time. "Are you okay?" she asked with concern that sounded genuine but felt completely artificial. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Tyler ran toward the elevator, pushing through crowds of party guests who felt insubstantial, like walking through fog shaped into human forms. But when he reached where the elevator should have been, there was only a blank wall. The elevator that had brought him up to the rooftop had vanished entirely, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. He searched frantically for another exit, stairs, fire escape, anything, but found only the seamless glass walls of the building's exterior. The party continued around him as if nothing was wrong, with the faceless guests dancing and laughing and carrying on their scripted conversations. "Looking for something?" asked a voice behind him. Tyler turned to find a man in an expensive suit, not one of the security guards, but someone who radiated authority and command. His appearance was perfect in the way that seemed artificial, like a computer-generated image of what a powerful person should look like. I want to leave, Tyler said, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. I need to go home. The man smiled with understanding that felt completely cold. I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, this party never ends. We've been looking for new guests to help us maintain the energy, and you've been selected to join our permanent celebration. Tyler looked around desperately and realized that many of the party guests were now staring at him with expectant expressions. Their faces had the same artificial perfection as the man in the suit, and their movements had synchronized into unnatural stillness. Every few months we send out invitations to young people with the kind of life energy we need, the man continued conversationally. You responded so enthusiastically to our invitation, and you've been such a wonderful addition to tonight's festivities. We'd hate to see that energy go to waste. Tyler ran toward the edge of the rooftop, hoping to find a fire escape or some other way down from the building. But when he looked over the safety barrier, he saw something that made his mind reel. The street below wasn't 30 floors down. It was thousands of feet down, as if the building were floating in empty space high above the city. The height is just for atmosphere, the man explained, appearing beside Tyler with inhuman speed. We found that our guests enjoy the illusion of being at a normal rooftop party, even though we exist in a space between dimensions. It makes the transition easier. As Tyler watched in horror, the other party guests began moving toward him in a coordinated group. Their movements were no longer even attempting to look human. They glided across the rooftop surface without their feet touching the ground, their arms moving in perfect synchronization. Don't worry, the man said as the figures surrounded Tyler. The party really is endless. You'll have eternity to dance and drink and socialize, and every few months you'll help us welcome new guests just as we're welcoming you tonight. Tyler felt the same artificial drowsiness he had seen in horror movies, but this was real and inescapable. His vision began to blur, and his memories of the outside world started to fade. The last thing he remembered clearly was feeling his own movements becoming synchronized with the other guests, his thoughts becoming simpler and more focused on the eternal celebration. Tyler Chen was reported missing by his roommate when he failed to return to their dorm after 3 days. Campus security found his car parked near downtown, but despite extensive searches of the area, no trace of him was discovered. The building address from his invitation led to an empty lot that had been vacant for over a decade, but several other college students in the city report receiving similar invitations in the weeks following Tyler's disappearance. The invitations appear in mailboxes with no postmark, printed on expensive paper that feels almost too real to touch. Most recipients throw them away, assuming they're elaborate pranks. But late at night, people in the downtown area sometimes report seeing lights high in the sky above the empty lot where Tyler's invitation had directed him. The lights pulse with music that can't quite be heard, and occasionally, witnesses claim to see silhouettes dancing against the night sky, celebrating a party that exists somewhere between reality and nightmare. The invitations continue to appear, always targeting young people with active social media presence and busy social lives. They're written in the same elegant font, printed on the same expensive cardstock, and they always contain the same mysterious message: bring this invitation for entry, tell no one. Those who receive them report feeling an inexplicable urge to attend the party, as if the invitation itself carries some kind of compulsion. Most resist the urge, and eventually forget about the strange invitation entirely. But every few months, someone doesn't resist. Someone curious and adventurous enough to investigate an exclusive party from an unknown host. Someone looking for the experience of a lifetime. And high above the city, in a space that exists between dimensions, the eternal party continues, always ready to welcome new guests who are looking for a celebration that will truly last forever.